The three sons of Zephyria were dying, casting long dark shadows across the planet's surface. Commander Veltar stood at the observation deck of the Planetary Defense Station, watching yet another evacuation ship disappear into the black void of space. His 4 eyes reflected the orange glow of the setting suns, but there was no peace in this sunset, only fear. The Void Swarm had been unstoppable. In just 1 month, they had completely destroyed 17 entire star systems. These weren't just attacks, they were total consumption. The bioships of the Void Swarm didn't just destroy planets, they ate them. Every building, every tree, every living creature was absorbed into their massive organic vessels. What remained behind was nothing but empty space and floating debris. Veltar's people, the Zephyrians, were peaceful by nature. They had spent thousands of years building beautiful cities, creating art, and exploring the mysteries of science. War was something they read about in history books, not something they lived through. Their weapons were designed for mining asteroids and clearing space debris, not fighting an enemy that treated entire worlds like snacks. "Sir, we're receiving responses to our distress beacon," called out Communications Officer Nixara from her station. Her voice was shaking, and Veltar could hear the exhaustion in every word. They had been sending out calls for help for weeks now, reaching out to every known civilization in their part of the galaxy. Veltar turned away from the window, his military uniform wrinkled from days of continuous duty. Any of the major powers responding? What about the Centauri Republic? They have the largest fleet in this sector. Nixara checked her screens again, her 6 fingers dancing across the controls. The Centauris say they're dealing with their own border disputes. They can't spare any ships. She scrolled through more messages. The Andromedan Alliance sent their regrets. They're calling it a local conflict and don't want to get involved. Veltar felt his heart sink. Local conflict. The Void Swarm was consuming everything in its path. How was that local? But he understood the real reason. Nobody wanted to fight an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The great powers of the galaxy were protecting themselves, leaving smaller civilizations like his to face extinction alone. "There is one more response, sir," Nixara said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It's from a planet called Earth. The message came through on an old frequency, and the signal is strange." "Strange how?" Veltar asked, moving closer to her station. "Well, sir, according to our records, Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. The inhabitants are listed as a species that somehow managed to evolve on one of the most dangerous planets ever discovered." Veltar's 4 eyes opened wide in shock. Everyone in the galaxy knew about Deathworlders, though most had never seen one. These were creatures that lived on planets so hostile that even visiting them required specialized equipment. Worlds with deadly storms, poisonous atmospheres, extreme temperatures, and predators that could tear apart a starship. The fact that any intelligent life could evolve on such planets was considered nearly impossible. Most civilized species viewed Deathworlders as violent, primitive savages. They were the kind of beings that solved problems with brute force rather than diplomacy. Stories spread throughout the galaxy about their unpredictable nature and their tendency to fight instead of negotiate. Respectable civilizations kept their distance, but Veltar was out of options. His people were facing complete extinction. The Void Swarm would reach their homeworld within days, and their evacuation ships could only save a fraction of the population. Desperate times called for desperate measures, even if it meant dealing with dangerous primitives. "What exactly do they offer?" he asked, dreading the answer. Nixara read from her screen, her voice filled with disbelief. "They say they're sending aid immediately. No conditions, no payment required, no negotiations needed. They just say help is on the way." For the first time in weeks, Veltar felt a tiny spark of hope in his chest. Maybe these Deathworlders had medical supplies they could spare. Perhaps they had some old transport ships that could help with the evacuation. Even primitive technology might be useful at this point. He had no idea how wrong he was about what humans considered aid. Admiral Jack Morrison stood on the command bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he watched the most impressive sight in human space. Stretched out before him were 200 of Earth's most powerful warships, each one a masterpiece of human engineering and destructive capability. The massive vessels hung in space like sleeping giants, their dark holes covered in weapon systems that could turn asteroids into dust. The bridge around him buzzed with activity. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems and preparing for what would be humanity's first major military operation outside their home sector. Morrison had been fighting wars for 30 years, but this felt different. This wasn't about territory or resources or politics. This was about helping someone who had asked for help. "Admiral, the folks back at command are wondering if maybe we should send the hospital ships instead," suggested Captain Lisa Rodriguez from her position at the tactical station. She was young for a captain, but Morrison had seen her in action during the outer colony conflicts. The woman could coordinate a fleet battle while eating breakfast and never spill a drop of coffee. Morrison let out a deep laugh that echoed across the bridge. The sound made his crew smile with anticipation. They knew that laugh. It meant their admiral had found something interesting to fight, and fighting was what humans did best. "Rodriguez, when someone calls you up and says they've got a pest problem, you don't send them a first aid kit and some bandages. You send an exterminator with the biggest can of bug spray you can find." The crew chuckled at this. Morrison had a way of explaining complex military situations in terms that made perfect sense. The Void Swarm wasn't a political problem or a diplomatic crisis. It was an infestation that needed to be removed permanently. Colonel Mike Thompson, the fleet's Marine commander, walked over to the central holographic display. With a few gestures, he brought up detailed images of the Void Swarm's bioships. The alien vessels looked more like massive insects than spacecraft, with organic curves and what appeared to be living armor plating. "Take a look at these bugs, Admiral. Intelligence says they've been having a real easy time of it, just bullying peaceful species that don't know how to fight back." Morrison studied the images with professional interest. The bioships were large, probably well-armored, and clearly designed for consumption rather than combat. "You know what the problem is with bullies, Thompson? They get real confident when nobody punches back. These things have been picking on herbivores and pacifists for so long. They've forgotten what happens when you mess with someone who actually knows how to throw a punch." Commander Beth Carter looked up from the weapons console, her fingers still dancing across the controls as she ran final system checks. "Admiral, weapons status report. All ships are showing green across the board. Kinetic batteries are loaded and ready. Fusion warheads are armed and standing by, and the new antimatter torpedoes are primed for field testing." Morrison nodded with the satisfaction of a craftsman who had been given the perfect tools for the job. The antimatter torpedoes were humanity's latest creation, weapons so powerful that they had only been tested on uninhabited asteroids. Each torpedo carried enough destructive force to crack a small moon in half. "Outstanding, Carter. How long until we can jump?" "All ships report ready for hyperspace in 15 minutes, sir," came the reply from the navigation station. Morrison looked around at his bridge crew, then out at the fleet that would soon carry humanity's answer to the Void Swarm's reign of terror. These weren't just warships, they were a message written in steel and fire. The message was simple. Earth had heard the call for help, and Earth was coming. "You know, people," Morrison said to his crew, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. "We're about to give these aliens exactly the kind of aid they need, the permanent kind." The bridge crew exchanged looks of anticipation. They understood what their admiral meant. This wasn't going to be a rescue mission or a evacuation operation. This was going to be an extermination. The Void Swarm had made a critical error in judgment. They had threatened innocent people, and humanity had a very specific response to that kind of behavior. As the final preparations continued, Morrison couldn't help but smile. Somewhere, out there, peaceful aliens were hoping for medical supplies and transport ships. What they were going to get instead was 200 ships, full of very angry humans, with a lot of very big guns. It was going to be beautiful. The Zephyrian Council chamber had been designed for peaceful discussions about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The soft blue lighting and curved walls were meant to create a calming atmosphere where rational beings could solve problems through conversation. Today, however, the chamber felt more like a tomb, as every council member stared at their sensor displays in complete shock. Where they had expected to see a few small medical ships, or perhaps some old cargo vessels, their screens now showed something that defied belief. Massive warships were dropping out of hyperspace one after another, each vessel so large that it dwarfed their biggest cities. The energy readings coming from these ships were beyond anything in Zephyrian experience. A single one of these vessels was generating enough power to run their entire homeworld for 100 years. By the 7 moons, whispered Council Leader Yithrin, his voice barely audible in the stunned silence. His 4 eyes were fixed on the main display, watching as more and more ships materialized from hyperspace. What are those things? Commander Veltar stood frozen at his position, his military training completely inadequate for what he was witnessing. These weren't ships in any sense that he understood. They were mobile fortresses, bristling with weapon systems that looked like they could crack planets. The hulls were dark and angular, designed not for exploration or trade, but for one purpose only: war. The main screen flickered to life, and suddenly they were looking at a human face. Admiral Morrison appeared on the display, and even across the vast differences between species, his nature was immediately clear. This was a predator. His face was marked with old scars. His eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had killed before and would kill again. When he smiled, it wasn't the friendly expression the Zephyrians were used to from diplomatic meetings. It was the smile of a hunter who had found interesting prey. Behind Morrison, the bridge of his ship was a study in controlled violence. Human officers moved with military precision, their conversations filled with terms that made the Zephyrians' blood run cold. They heard phrases like kill ratios, acceptable casualties, and target acquisition. These weren't the words of rescuers or aid workers. These were the words of professional soldiers. "Greetings, Zephyrian Council," Morrison said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never doubted his ability to solve any problem through superior firepower. "I'm Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call for aid against the Void Swarm." Veltar found his voice, though it sounded weak and uncertain, even to his own ears. "Admiral Morrison, we were hoping for medical supplies, perhaps some refugee transport ships to help evacuate our people." Morrison's laugh cut through Veltar's words like a blade. It was genuine amusement, as if the Zephyrian had just told him the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Medical supplies. Friend, when someone's trying to eat your entire species, you don't need medicine and band-aids. You need those somebodies to stop existing permanently." The casual way Morrison talked about ending lives sent chills through every council member present. This wasn't how civilized beings discussed conflict. Where were the negotiations, the attempts at peaceful resolution, the carefully worded diplomatic protests? Captain Rodriguez leaned into view, her expression all business. "Sir, our scouts have finished their reconnaissance. The swarm is massing for another attack on the outer colonies. Current intelligence suggests they'll arrive in approximately 6 hours. Morrison's eyes lit up with what could only be described as anticipation. "Perfect timing," he said, then turned back to address the Zephyrians. "Don't you worry, folks. Humanity's here now, and we specialize in making problems go away." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council chamber in a silence so complete that the humming of the air recyclers seemed deafeningly loud. Council leader Yithrin slowly sank into his chair, his 4 eyes still staring at the blank screen where Morrison's predatory smile had been moments before. "What have we done?" whispered one of the younger council members, her voice shaking with terror. Veltar understood the horrible truth that was settling over all of them like a dark cloud. In their desperation, they had sent a distress call across the galaxy, hoping for help from civilized beings who would offer medicine, supplies, and safe passage for refugees. Instead, their call had been answered by something far more dangerous than the Void Swarm could ever be. They had asked for help from predators, and predators had answered. 200 ships full of humans who viewed their crisis not as a humanitarian disaster, but as a target-rich environment. The Zephyrians had wanted salvation, but what they had received was something far more terrifying. They had received humanity's version of aid, and they were beginning to understand that when humans offered to help, entire species had a tendency to stop existing. The real question now wasn't whether they would survive the Void Swarm. The question was whether they would survive their rescuers. The Void Swarm's collective consciousness stirred as its sensors detected the approaching human fleet. For millions of years, this ancient intelligence had consumed civilizations across the galaxy, turning entire species into fuel for its endless hunger. Its bioships were living weapons, each one evolved through countless battles to be the perfect predator. They had organic armor that could absorb energy blasts, self-healing hulls that repaired damage in seconds, and weapons that could dissolve matter at the molecular level. As the human ships approached, the swarm's hive mind felt only mild curiosity. These new vessels were larger than the usual prey, but size had never mattered before. The peaceful Zephyrians had large ships too, and they had been consumed just as easily as any other species. The swarm's bioships moved forward with the confidence that came from never having lost a single battle. That confidence lasted exactly 47 seconds. The first indication that something was wrong came when Colonel Thompson's Marines opened fire instead of the energy weapons that most civilized species used. The humans had loaded their ships with something far more primitive and infinitely more deadly. Thousands of kinetic penetrator rounds streaked through space, simple chunks of depleted uranium that had been accelerated to incredible speeds by magnetic launchers. The swarm's organic armor had evolved over millions of years to absorb and deflect energy-based attacks. Laser beams, plasma bolts, and particle weapons were all neutralized by the bioship's living hulls. But the swarm had never encountered anything as brutally simple as a piece of metal moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The first kinetic rounds struck the lead bioships with devastating effect. The living armor that had protected them against every other weapon in the galaxy simply crumpled like paper. The uranium projectiles punched through the organic hulls and continued straight through to the other side, leaving massive holes that even the swarm's healing abilities couldn't repair fast enough. Splash 6 bioships reported Lieutenant Tom Bradley from his position aboard the Valkyrie, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "These things fold up real nice when you hit them with enough kinetic energy." Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display with the professional satisfaction of a craftsman seeing his tools work perfectly. The bioships that had seemed so invincible just moments before were now tumbling through space, their living hulls torn apart by weapons that any human engineering student could have designed. But Morrison wasn't satisfied with just destroying the enemy ships. He wanted to send a message. "Captain Martinez, deploy the nanobots. Let's see how these bugs like a taste of their own medicine." Captain Elena Martinez's ship, the Prometheus, opened its cargo bays and released billions of microscopic machines into space. These nanobots had originally been designed for medical applications, tiny robots that could repair human tissue at the cellular level. But human ingenuity had found a different use for them. The nanobots had been reprogrammed to target and disrupt biological systems, turning the swarm's own living nature against them. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The remaining bioships began to convulse as the nanobots invaded their systems, rewriting their biological code and turning their own healing processes into weapons of self-destruction. Ships that had been advancing to attack suddenly found their own bodies betraying them. "They're trying to adapt," observed Commander Beth Carter from her weapons console, watching as the bioship's cellular structure began to shift and change. "The bioships are attempting to modify their biology to resist the nanobots." Morrison nodded with grim respect for his enemy's abilities. The swarm was indeed trying to evolve a defense against the nanobots, its living ships changing their very DNA in real time. It was an impressive display of biological engineering, the kind of adaptation that had allowed the swarm to survive for millions of years. "Too bad for them," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. "Rodriguez, time for the antimatter torpedoes. Let's give them something they can't adapt to." Captain Lisa Rodriguez's fingers danced over her targeting systems, selecting the largest concentration of bioships. "Firing antimatter torpedoes now, sir." The new weapons streaked through space like falling stars, each one carrying a payload. That represented the pinnacle of human destructive capability. When the torpedoes struck their targets, they didn't just explode, they converted matter directly into energy, creating miniature suns that burned with the fury of creation itself. The bioships caught in the antimatter. Explosions simply ceased to exist. Their matter converted to pure energy, in brilliant flashes that could be seen from 3 star systems away. There was no debris, no wreckage to salvage or analyze. Where moments before, there had been living warships the size of cities. Now there was only expanding clouds of superheated plasma. For the first time in its millions of years of existence, the Void Swarm's hive mind experienced something completely foreign to its nature. As it watched its supposedly invincible bioships being systematically destroyed by weapons it couldn't understand or counter, the ancient intelligence felt something it had never felt before. Fear. The hunters had become the hunted, and humanity was just getting started. 3 days after the first human ships had arrived in Zephyrian space, the impossible had happened. The Void Swarm, a species that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years, no longer existed, not defeated in battle, not driven away to lick their wounds and return another day, but completely and utterly extinct. The humans had hunted down every single bioship, tracked every fleeing spore, and eliminated every trace of the parasitic species, with a methodical thoroughness that even impressed their own military analysts. The hunt had been relentless. Human ships had spread across 17 star systems, following radiation trails and energy signatures that no other species had even known to look for. They had deployed sensor nets that could detect biological matter at the molecular level, launched probe swarms that mapped every asteroid and piece of debris, and used computational power that turned the entire operation into a galaxy-wide game of hide-and-seek, where the humans always won. Council Leader Yithrin now stood in the conference room aboard Admiral Morrison's flagship, struggling to find words adequate for what he had witnessed. The room itself told the story of who these humans really were. The walls were covered with tactical displays showing weapons, diagrams, battle formations, and casualty projections. Officers moved through the space with casual efficiency, discussing combat strategies and kill ratios, as easily as most species talked about the weather. What struck Yithrin most was how normal this all seemed to them. The complete destruction of an ancient enemy wasn't cause for celebration or ceremony. It was just another day at work. The humans treated the extinction of the Void Swarm the same way his people might treat fixing a broken water recycler, a problem that needed solving, nothing more. Admiral Morrison Yithrin began carefully, his voice still shaky from everything he had witnessed. We cannot thank you enough for your aid. The threat that has plagued our galaxy for millennia is finally ended. Morrison waved his hand, dismissively, as if the complete military victory over an seemingly unstoppable enemy was hardly worth mentioning. Don't mention it, Council Leader. We needed the target practice anyway. It's been too quiet lately, and our weapons techs were getting bored. Ythrin blinked all four of his eyes in amazement. Target practice. They had just witnessed the most decisive military campaign in galactic history, and Morrison was calling it target practice. Morrison's expression grew more serious as he leaned forward in his chair. But here's the thing, Council Leader. You folks seem like decent people. Peaceful, civilized, the kind of neighbors we'd actually like to have around. That's getting rarer these days. Neighbors? Ythrin asked, a note of nervousness creeping into his voice. He wasn't sure he was ready for whatever humans considered neighborly behavior. Captain Rodriguez moved to the central holographic display and pulled up a detailed star chart showing both human and Zephyrian space. The Admiral's offering your people a formal defense pact. You see, humanity's made quite a few enemies over the years, and we've learned that the best way to handle threats is to stop them cold before they become real problems. Ythron stared at the star chart, seeing the implications immediately. Human space was vast, stretching across dozens of systems, each one probably defended by fleets like the one that had just erased the Void Swarm from existence. You would, protect us, even though we have nothing to offer in return. Colonel Thompson let out a hearty laugh that filled the conference room. Friend, you just got a front row seat to see what we do to things that threaten our allies. Trust me, word about this little demonstration is going to spread through the galaxy faster than a hyperspace message. Anyone thinking about messing with the Zephyrians is going to have to ask themselves one very important question. Do they really want to deal with humanity's response? Morrison stood up from his chair and extended his right hand toward Ythrin, a gesture the Council Leader had learned meant friendship and agreement among humans. Welcome to the neighborhood, Council Leader. From this moment forward, anyone who wants to hurt your people is going to have to go through us first. And as you've seen, that tends to be a very permanent kind of problem for them. As Ythrin reached out and grasped Morrison's hand in the human gesture of friendship, he realized that his people had gained something far more valuable than rescue or aid. They had gained guardians. Terrifying, violent, absolutely lethal guardians who treated friendship as a sacred bond worth killing and dying for. The handshake felt like signing a contract, written in the blood of humanity's enemies. From this day forward, the Zephyrians would never again face extinction alone. They had allies now, allies who considered the complete destruction of entire species to be routine pest control. As news of the Defense Pact spread throughout the galaxy, other peaceful civilizations began to understand a new reality. The humans, those savage Deathworlders that everyone had avoided and feared, weren't just random predators looking for victims. They were something far more dangerous and infinitely more valuable. They were protectors. And in a galaxy full of threats, having humanity as your friend had suddenly become the most valuable commodity in known space. The galaxy would never be the same, and for the first time in their history, the peaceful species weren't afraid of that change.